Have you ever tried really hard to stop doing something, but the harder you try, you just get deeper in the pit and it seems like it's taken over your whole life? Well, that is an experience for many, including my guest on the program today. I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you so much for joining me. Um, that scenario of getting hooked and deep in the pit can apply to all kinds of areas of life, but perhaps no more applicable than to the area of porn. Jessica Harris has experienced that, and she's not experiencing that any longer. Her story is powerful and gives so much hope. First of all, shining the light that porn is not only a male thing, it's a woman thing too. In this conversation with Jessica, we get a bit under the surface. We don't focus only on, in fact, primarily about stopping a behavior. We talk about the movements of the heart underneath all of this, the desires, the changes that has to happen, what brings wholeness. I really believe this will be encouraging to you. So, Jessica Harris. Jessica Harris, a pleasure, a delight, an honor to have you on the program today. Thank you for taking your time and your story. This is a gift.
Well, thank you so much for having me here.
We're talking about something that people inside the church in particular, but even outside, don't really like to talk about. Porn, women, sexuality, and just what all that means. I'd like to start with just giving you an opportunity to share a bit of your story. How did you come to this? Certainly God is using you in some great ways. What led to where you are now?
Right. So I grew up in the church, actually. I grew up in a Christian home. It was a broken home, but it was we still were very active in our church and regular attenders. And I was exposed to pornography when I was 13 years old. And this is back in the day of dial-up internet and floppy disks. So it's well before cell phones and when the internet was still kind of new and we didn't really understand perhaps the dangers that come with that kind of accessibility. So I found pornography when I was 13 completely by accident. I was researching for school and came across a hardcore porn video, and it started throwing pop-ups at me, and eventually I ended up on a site for hardcore pornography, and kind of found the amount that could be out there free and easily accessible. And sex was not something that we talked about in my family, and it's not something that we really talked about in church other than to say, don't have that and don't do that.
Right.
So this just felt like, oh, this is kind of the forbidden fruit that everyone's been talking about. So there was curiosity there, but also kind of a level of being freaked out because the first content I was exposed to was relatively violent. And so it was like, what is this? And what have I just found? And what's going on? And so I struggled for years, and tried to rationalize it by saying, well, it's not sex, right? It's not technically sex. I'm still a virgin. I'm not going to get pregnant from this. It's not going to hurt me. It's not wrong. It felt like a safe way to maybe exercise that desire, in part because nobody was talking about it anywhere.
Yeah.
And then when I was 17, so my senior year of high school, I realized my use was out of control. It felt like the air I breathed, honestly. It just felt like I could not go a day without watching pornography. I would lie to my mom and like cover my tracks and find ways to manipulate and make things happen so that I could have space and time to be able to indulge. I was reading erotica at school. It was all consuming, and I kind of stepped back and was like, I don't want it to be this much of a problem. So I tried to control it at that point and realized I couldn't. It felt completely out of my control. So I went looking for help and could find nothing. Didn't feel like I could talk to my mom about this. Didn't feel like I could talk to my church about this because no one's talking about this.
Yeah.
And then when I'm looking for help online, there's nothing out there. So I thought, wow, am I the only woman in the world who has struggled with this? And eventually went off to Christian college. And to shoot down a myth and a misconception, I was a 4.0 student and actively involved in my church. So it's not like I was some delinquent,
Yes.
hanging out in the back and wasn't, was failing out of school. Like I was the good girl and I was the high achiever. And so I went off to college and thought, okay, like maybe my church hasn't seen this, small town church. Maybe my family hasn't seen this and doesn't know what to do, but surely a college is going to have experience with this and is going to know how to help.
Sure.
I got caught in college and they looked at me and they said, we know this wasn't you. Women don't have this problem. And it
Wow.
was like, oh, okay. So what is wrong with me then? There must be something fundamentally wrong with me that I am a woman and I do have this issue. And so that just spun me into this just pit of shame of there has to be something so twisted and so messed up with me that there's no way God could ever love somebody like me. Like there's no way out of this. I'm
Yeah.
stuck. And
Yeah.
I decided that I was going to be a porn star. So I went from being the good Christian girl, graduating top of my class in high school, going to be a doctor, to dropping out of college and saying that I was going to become a porn star. And God just, thank goodness, God just got a hold of my life and got me back on some kind of track away from that. And I ended up at a Bible college the next year. And while there, they said to the women in the room, they had gathered all of the female students,
Hmm.
and they said, we know some of you struggle with pornography and we want to help you.
Wow.
And I remember feeling so much hope in that, like, oh, I'm not alone. And so it's really, I feel like my ministry and the reason why I write and speak and talk about this now was really to help change that conversation, because
Yes.
I know the shame that came from women don't have this problem and the freedom that came from we know women do and we're able to help you. And so I found freedom. I worked through a lot and it took me a while. Probably 2 years really to feel like I had victory in this area, and um, went to look for resources again and there were still none.
Hmm.
And I just I couldn't believe that there still wasn't any, but I was also like, God, no, I'm not doing it. Like, find someone else, please. This is not the first thing I want people to know about me. Like I felt like I had an image to uphold, like
Yep.
I have a face to keep here. And he really just worked on my heart. And I kind of angrily started my blog after a couple years of arguing with him about it. Like, fine, I'll start it. And then you're going to give me what I want. Then I'm going to go, and do my own life the way I want to. And I started Beggar's Daughter in 2009. And women came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It felt like to say, oh my goodness, here I thought I was alone. And I had this moment of going, I can't leave them. Like I can't leave them here. I know what that's like. And how can I, knowing what that's like and knowing that there's a way out, how can I just leave them here to suffer while I go off and live my life like this never happened? So it's been quite a journey, almost
Yes.
14 years, but that's where we are now.
And God has opened some wonderful doors, and we'll talk about your book and all of that here too. But there's a word or two that you referenced in sharing your story in that way that I thought was really telling. When you talked about you as a teenage girl, this wasn't doing sex, but it felt like I was addressing a desire, and you were referencing, I believe you used the word desire,
Mm.
or longing. And I'd love you to talk about that for a minute, because I think one of the places that I see the church has not done well with is really honoring and acknowledging the desires that are within us that God put there. Of course, evil hijacks it,
Right.
but talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think it's one of perhaps the failings of what we call now the purity culture, which
Sure.
was the movement back in the 90s and the early 2000s to really emphasize saving sex for marriage. And I think in doing that, the way we talked about sex, especially for young women, scandalized desire. Like it made desire something evil and something almost to be afraid of, in a
Yeah.
way. Like this is wrong, and this is going to corrupt you, and you can't trust it, and you have to you have to get it to go away, and you have to ignore it, and you have to and instead of having this holistic kind of approach to our sexuality that says, hey, like God gave this to you, and there's a good way to use it, and there's a good way to express that, and it's not inherently in and of itself dangerous. What happens is it can be preyed upon, and
Yes.
it can be twisted, and it can be abused, and it can be misused. But I think that context is kind of missing from the church. And it's interesting because some of the churches that I've gone and I've spoken at, I can think of one where a married couple came up to me, and the wife said, I grew up in the purity culture, she said, and we were constantly, like, when the girls had their girls' night in youth group, it was, don't cause your brother to stumble, like, don't, you are responsible for keeping them on the straight and narrow path, like sex is wrong. And it was almost this oppressive message about it. And she's like, and when I shared that with my husband, assuming that the guys had gotten the same message, he was completely shocked. She says, because the guys were getting more like, sex is awesome, sex is great, just hang in there until you're married, like keep it together until you can get there. And she says, we weren't getting that as women. We were being taught to almost fear ourselves, and to, because we could lead other people astray, and we could mess everything up, and we could ruin our lives forever, and and there was just so much fear and shame surrounded the conversation of desire, when there doesn't need to be. We need a God honoring and healthy conversation surrounding that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's good. You've alluded to the fact that your home was a Christian home, that you heard the right truths, if I can use that word, and this was a place in your life that still became a struggle. I don't. There's no simple answer to this, and I'm sure it's different for many people. But looking back, what do you see as the ways you were vulnerable? It sounds like it wasn't a sexually destructive household, but with seeing your parents act out sexually, if I can use that word. What do you see as the dynamics that led you enter that kind of world?
I think more, I think, I don't know that there's anything that, like, nothing pushed me there. Like, certainly I have women who come to me, like, their parents showed them pornography, which is
Sure.
wrong in, like, all of its own levels. But
Sure.
I didn't have that. Instead, I kind of had the silence of it. And so it felt like there wasn't safety to talk about this in my home. And because there wasn't safety, there was no way to kind of process
Mm-hmm.
what I was being exposed to and what I was seeing. And, like, one of the things that's been so helpful for me in my adult years is to understand that when a child, even a young teenager, is exposed to pornography, it's actually a traumatic event for them, especially if they don't have a, a vocabulary to describe what they're seeing. Like, if I knew it was sex, but I didn't understand that it's not supposed to be violent, that it's not supposed to be aggressive, that it's not supposed to be like this. Like, I knew it was in that box, but I didn't know what was wrong or right about it. Like, I didn't have a way to talk about it. And so I think that silence, for me, that silence didn't introduce me to it, but it sure made me feel like I was stuck there then, because there's no one I can really talk through this with. And my mom did find out once when I was, like, I think 14. I mean, right after I had started, I hadn't learned how to clear internet history or anything like that. The internet's still new, right? And so I hadn't learned how to clear any of that stuff. And she had found out that I had been looking at pornography. And I love her dearly. I love my mom, and she's gone through so much healing. But when I was 14 years old, she absolutely lost her mind. And she was like, what on earth is wrong with you? Like, why are you looking at this stuff? I never even had these kinds of desires until I was married. Like, what has happened to you? Just tell me that you're just curious. Please just tell me that you're just curious. And it was a lot for me to kind of absorb her shame and her overwhelm. And I just was like, I was just curious. I'll never do it again. Obviously I lied, but in that moment, it was like, oh man, what have I done, like I've freaked my own mom out. And there was just this silence that kind of led to confusion. And when we're confused, our natural tendency is to try to figure it out. Like we just like to problem solve. And so when you're watching pornography and confused about pornography, your solution is to continue watching more to try to understand it more. So I think for me, it was more the silence that kind of made me feel trapped there. There wasn't necessarily anything in my family that led me to it, but the silence definitely made me feel trapped.
That's good. So my mind then extends that to one of the things that we as humans, as friends, as parents, as people in the church, or whoever we are, um, silence doesn't help. We think we may be protecting, or some people may think they'd be protecting by not talking about it, but you're doing just the opposite.
Right. Yeah.
And that's part of what you are doing in your ministry is talking about it. When you entered your journey to wholeness, what are some of the movements in your own heart that were important? You've alluded already to the fact that this is more than about just stopping a behavior, as important as that is. This is about things under the surface. What were some of those movements in your heart?
Yeah, I love how I love how you called it like your journey to wholeness, because I think that is such a great way of looking at it, as opposed to like your journey of freedom, because we look at freedom as like you have stopped doing what you're not supposed to be doing, but like wholeness is about healing and recovery. And so for me, because I started watching pornography when I was 13, and 13 is just such a huge age for development, not just sexual development, but like relationally understanding. And there's a lot that happens in your brain and body and heart at 13 that for me was becoming stunted almost by those years of pornography. Pornography had become the way I coped with any emotion that I had. So if I was really stressed, it was pornography. If I was really happy, it was celebrating with pornography. If I was really sad, it was turning to pornography. And so I had no coping mechanisms. I didn't know how to deal with emotions. That was the big one for me. And so when I was coming out of pornography, it was like going through almost like an emotional withdrawal of some sorts, where my emotions were absolutely all over the place. Like one moment I'd be super, super, super happy, and the next moment I would just be flaming mad, like I didn't know how to process any of those. I didn't know how to have healthy relationships, just like friendships, even with other women. Like I didn't know how to have those kinds of relationships because I'd never had invested the time in those. My time was completely consumed in pornography. So I had to learn how to develop emotional health, and I had to learn how to have healthy relationships, and I had to learn how like to better manage my time. Like there's just so many other things, and to heal my view of sexuality and sex, like to heal my view of men, because years of watching this content gives you an idea of what men are like, and then you start to see them just as sexual objects. We talk about women being objectified in pornography, but when you're a woman watching pornography, you're also objectifying the men. So to learn to see men in my life not as sexual objects, but as like men who can be great friends, who can contribute to a conversation, like things like that just seem no duh that you develop in high school and in your early college years, I didn't have, because all that time I had just been turning to pornography for everything. So there was a lot in my life that needed healed underneath the surface. And I was so thankful for how the women who were helping me, how they had set things up, because there was probably 5 or 6 women who were kind of taking me under their wing at the college where I was, and really working on helping me find wholeness, as you said. But only one of them was concerned with pornography. So like my meetings with her were specifically about pornography, specifically about whether or not I had been tempted, and specifically how to break free from pornography. The other women, it felt like, were more concerned with my identity, because if pornography has been who I am for 4 or 5, 6 years, they were more concerned with, what does Jessica look like when she doesn't have this? And how do we build that up and bring healing into those areas so that when we take away this crutch, basically, that she's had, she's able to stand. And that was so important, I think, and so vital to that whole process of finding healing and wholeness.
Oh, that's good. That is so good for anybody trying to help anyone else who may be struggling with that. Your life moved forward. God brought a husband into your life. I believe you have some daughters now.
I do too.
What are you wanting for them? What are you, how are you parenting in light of the even more ubiquitous availability of porn?
Yeah, it's so scary for me to think of what they are up against as girls. And I understand now, because my oldest is 3. So I understand now other parents' desires to just kind of like wrap your kids in bubble wrap and like never let them go anywhere. So for us, it has been a lot of wanting to have an emotionally healthy home. And sure. Because that was such a huge part of my journey, we definitely encourage even our oldest to, she's allowed to have emotions. We want her to come to us with those sorts of things. Like, nothing is too big or too heavy for us, even when she's 3. Like, she doesn't have anything super big and heavy right now, but we want her to feel comfortable coming to us with anger or with sadness or with happiness and telling us about her day. And so we're kind of opening up those conversations even when she's 3. I have talked to her about, in very like age appropriate terms, right. When I hand her my iPad for whatever reason, I usually have guided access on so that she can't get anywhere but the sign language app that I'm showing her. But I try to practice what I've always told parents, when you hand them a piece of technology like that, you are giving them access, whether you want them to access it or not, you're giving them access to pornography. And so having a vocabulary for it. So I have told her, I say, there are pictures online. There's lots of really cool things out there that you can see on your computer. But I said, if you ever see anything that is a person that doesn't have their clothes on, you need to come to let mommy and daddy know, and just things like that, where it's not like, we're not planting seeds so that she goes and looks for it. We're just giving her an awareness of like, oh, this is out there, and we're giving her a strategy for it. So if this happens, this is what you do. And when you equip kids with that, it's a less traumatic experience because they understand what they've seen, and they know what to do with it because you've told them what to do with it. So I've told her, I said, if you see that, just come and get mommy and daddy and we'll help you with it. Like, we'll help that.
That's good. That's really good.
And that's like to 3. Now I have no idea what we're going to do. What we're going to do when she's like
7
9
or
and asking us for an iPhone. But my husband and I definitely are very much proponents of delaying the personal smart technology for as long as possible. But we also are huge proponents of the conversation needs to happen in the home, because we might not give her an iPhone, but if she has friends out there, they can have iPhones. And if we aren't giving her a context for that, if we aren't giving her a battle plan kind of for if her friends show her something, or if she sees something, what is she supposed to do? Then we're doing that silence thing. We're doing that, oh, I can't tell my mom and dad about this. And we want our kids to feel like they can come to us with anything. So that's a groundwork we're trying to set now, even when they're little.
Yep. Jessica, among many things, you are an author. And if you're watching this or listening when we first released this, it comes out today. Your book, Quench, Discovering God's Abundant Grace for Women Struggling with Pornography and Sexual Shame. Couple really wonderful ideas in this book. There's so much, but a couple really great ideas that I just wanted us to focus on for a few minutes. One was the idea of shame, and that could be several podcasts in itself. I think the world would have us say, just get rid of shame and everything will be okay. You don't have to be ashamed about any of this. Many of our listeners or viewers may have experienced a Christian culture where shame is heaped on our behaviors. How do you see God dealing with all of that, especially around this area of sexuality and porn, and perhaps especially for a woman's heart?
Yeah. So it's tricky. Shame is always going to drive us into isolation. And I think that's one of the defining characteristics of shame, if you will. Shame is hiding, it's isolation, it's a reduce of your worth. It's, you're a horrible person for doing this. How could you ever do this? And you dishonor, and as opposed to God, who in his holiness might have standards and guidelines that he expects from us, but even then always provides a way to reconcile and always bridges the gap and provides a way back to himself. So I think we're missing that narrative a lot in the church of, we say it, but I think sometimes it's like a Christian fortune cookie. Like we say it and we don't really think about it much. We don't really apply it. We just kind of toss it out there as like a feel-good idea of, well, there's nothing you can do that God can't, reach through. But I think when you have something as nuanced as a woman struggling with pornography that feels like it's a new thing, it's not a new thing for women to struggle with sexual issues, but because the internet's newer and because like this seems like a newer issue for women, it can kind of feel like, well, maybe that's true for everybody's struggles up until this one. Like this one has now officially crossed the line and gone too far. And that's shame talking. Whenever there's an attempt to sever our relationship with God and our ability to come back to him, that's shame interacting there. And the problem is unfortunately, it can come from our families, or it can come from our Christian cultures and churches, even, where on like in the pulpit we'll say, well, there's nothing you can do that God can't reach through. But then when a woman comes forward and shares something like this, our reaction is one that's driven by shame, and then it translates that onto her and makes her feel like she can't tell anybody about this, she can't even tell God about this. But I think that's the distinction between the two. Like God in his holiness and his guilt, if you will always be for the desire to reconcile and to bring us back into relationship with him, whereas shame will always attack that relationship and try to sever it and drive us away and into hiding and into isolation.
Yeah. And God is never saying go away. He's always saying come. We feel like shame is saying that God says go away. He doesn't say that. That's good. You make the statement, we are created for intimacy. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that one line partway through your book just said so much. It speaks to the core of how we are all created. And just wanted to give you a moment to comment on that.
I think there's just power in understanding that. I think I understand that even more as a mom, of when you're holding this little baby who has no like understanding of the world. Like what they crave the most is a safe place with another human being. And I feel like all of us truly desire a way to be safe and authentic with somebody else or with people around us. Like none of us like being fake. None of us want to feel guarded. Like no one enjoys having to walk around hiding bits and pieces of themselves for fear of what other people are going to think. Like that's not fun for anybody, because we want to have that unhindered and authentic relationship with other people. We want that even in our marriages, but you see people go, well, that's not possible, so I'll just settle for, someone who looks attractive. But like we in our core want to be able to let our guard down with other people and to be safe and accepted and belong. Like, is that not a huge cry of culture right now? Like we want safety and belonging. We want to be loved for who we are. We want to be accepted for who we are. And we want to belong. And that is intimacy, like that ability to be truly known and truly loved and truly accepted, that is what it means to be intimate. And so people always like, it's not the same as sex. Like sex can be an expression of intimacy, but you can be intimate with somebody without having sexual relations with them. So I just feel like that is so core to who we are, and it kind of gets thwarted and sexualized of like all intimacy is sex, but it's not. Like we're created and we have this desire to be known and safe and loved in our relationships with other people.
I love how you differentiated intimacy and sex. We all need intimacy regardless of age or relationship status. And there's lots of sex going on without any intimacy. Porn is a great example of that. Right. So just to honor and pursue that need for connection that is God built within us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You talked also in your book, Quenched, connecting the story in John 4 of the woman at the well and Jesus' conversation with her, with the journey that you and other women wrestling with these matters of the heart experience, and an idea that I thought was so powerful. The difference between just having a drink of water and having my thirst quenched. And you say something like, the woman at the well, she didn't want her thirst quenched. She wanted indoor plumbing, more convenient water. I thought that was such a powerful idea. And I want to take a couple minutes to have you unpack that.
Right. So in the narrative of John 4 and the woman at the well, for those who might not be familiar, Jesus is in a land, Samaria. He's traveling back from somewhere, and the disciples have left him to go into town, and he's alone at a well. A Samaritan woman comes out, and she's coming out to draw water. It's not quite the right time of day for her to be doing this, but Jesus asks her for water, and she starts getting defensive, and she's telling him, like, you should not be asking me for water. You're a man, you're a Jewish man. What are you even doing here? Like, and he would not be able to drink the water that she would give him because the vessel would be unclean at that, like with her picking it up and giving it to him. Like, she cannot fulfill the request that he is asking. And so it kind of, there's this little back and forth between the two of them, and Jesus offers her living water, and she kind of asks him to explain. And he says, listen, you drink out this water, you're going to be thirsty again. But the water that I give, you drink that and you won't thirst again. And her response was so telling to me when I sat and thought about this. She goes, please give me this water so that I won't thirst and I never have to come here again. Yes. And it's like, he didn't say that at all. But isn't that not the kind of freedom that we sometimes want? As you were talking at the beginning, like, just get rid of the shame. Yep. Like, just tell me that what I'm doing is okay, so that I'm not ashamed anymore. And in the book, I equate her walk to the well as her shame. That's her. She's choosing to walk at the wrong time of day. She's almost like punishing herself for her actions. She's isolating herself. And she's going, hey, this is a solution for my shame. You're gonna take this walk away from me. And it's this idea of, you still have to go. You still have to go get water. You still have to do this. Like, he's not saying that you won't have to do that anymore. And she didn't get it. But isn't that the freedom sometimes that we want? We want to be able to stay right where we are doing what we're doing and just not feel bad about it anymore. And I've seen women do that. They'll go, well, I want to do this. I want to express my sexuality in this way. And so what do? They leave their families, they leave their church, they leave their husbands, they leave, and cut off all of these relationships, isolate. And then they finally like feel like they have what they want, but it's so empty because he's not piping his lifeline into our death. Like, he is calling us out of that. And he's calling us to himself. He's not saying, well, I'll just go ahead and funnel this to where you are and just stay there comfortable. Like, he's wanting us to come to him. So it was just this, I say in the book, like, she's like, this is indoor plumbing. I can stay in my home doing what I want and get this life-giving water, like win-win, done. I want that. And that's not what he's offering her at all.
Hence the title of your book, Quenched. Jessica, I feel like we could, just talk for a whole long time, but maybe we can move toward a close with this. What does it look like to have our thirst quenched? And perhaps especially for women who are struggling in this way with pornography or sexual shame?
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about before, this healing that can happen where, and I want to encourage a woman who's listening, who's like, I don't know what this looks like. I know it's so hard when you're in the midst of that struggle to feel like there's a life beyond and without pornography. And sometimes we look at freedom as like, okay, I am free as long as I can say no, and I'm going to live the rest of my life daily shooting down temptation to view pornography. I'm going to live the rest of my life with filters on my computer and with daily texts from an accountability partner. Like, this is what I'm doomed to kind of for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And we can't envision a freedom, true freedom from pornography, where it's not even a thought or a temptation on the daily for us anymore. Like, we just can't imagine that. All we're praying for is the ability to say no.
Yeah.
But I want to encourage women that, like, to live a life quenched is to be so healed and so abiding in Christ that there isn't that daily drive toward pornography, that it does truly become an issue of the past, where you might have occasional temptations, but they're so light and they're so easy to overcome because you are so connected to the vine and you're so nourished by the life of Christ. And so that's what it looks like. It doesn't look like I'm daily fighting, actively, punching pornography in the face. Like, it doesn't look like that. It looks like an abundant life that's truly free from the temptation and the pull of pornography. And that's totally possible. And I can say that as a woman who is experiencing that, where sometimes I kind of forget that pornography used to be an issue for me because it's not anymore to that extent. And sometimes I have to remember, oh yeah, that used to be a thing for me, but it's not anymore. And that is, to me, that's what it is to live life quenched.
That is quite a picture, Jessica. To imagine a life where that does not hook you, and it loses its pull, it loses its control, and you truly have a life not defined by that it's not something still happening to you. It happened, but that's not you anymore on the inside.
Right.
I think there may be some women, especially listening or watching right now, who just wonder, could that ever possibly be? I'm too bad. I've been in it too long. I've seen too much of the ugly, too much shame. I'm too powerless. As we close, just give a bit of encouragement and then invite people to connect with you and your resources.
Yeah, my encouragement would be that it does take time. So I think in the Christian culture, we kind of have this idea that, like, you love Jesus and, like, poof, you don't struggle with things anymore. But there is no poof. Like, you're dealing with a body and a brain that has been rewired to want this. But the beautiful thing is, it can be unwired to want it. But that process just takes time, and to not be discouraged when you fall. It's the new year and you're like, I've made it 3 weeks without, and then tomorrow you fall. You're not starting over. Like, you went 3 weeks. Like, celebrate that and, like, keep moving forward, keep growing, and don't get discouraged in that, because growth does take time. And I do have resources. I have a blog with years worth of blog posts on it. So probably no question that you can ask that hasn't been answered on there. beggarsdaughter.com. I have free resources, including a course on triggers to help identify what might be sending you into pornography. Like, if you're like, where did that just come from? I was doing just fine. Now all of a sudden I'm falling. Why is this happening? There's a free course on that and a free ebook for that. And I'm trying to put out more resources like that to be able to help women. And obviously there's the new book as well.
And we will make sure those links are under this video and in the show notes if you're listening, as well as links to your brand new book, Quenched, Discovering God's Abundant Grace for Women Struggling with Porn and Sexual Shame. Jessica, this has been a delight. Much blessings to you. May God spread this word and this book and enlarge your ministry. It's been really wonderful talking with you today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I know that was encouraging to you. If you feel like you're stuck, whether it's in porn and sexual shame or something similar, I know this encouraged you that there can be a way out. I want to second what Jessica said, that it does take time. This is not a momentary zap from here to there, as much as many of us would like that instant change, but it really, truly is possible. Do check the links under this video. We'll have links to Jessica's website, to her book, Quench, Discovering God's Abundant Grace for Women Struggling with Pornography and Sexual Shame, links to her social media. We'll also have there a link to our free 30-day devotional series, Towards Sexual Wholeness. And if you are new to us, that's been something that has just created a life-changing season for many people who have gone through that particular series. So check that link as well, Towards Sexual Wholeness from our ministry. Thank you again for joining me, and until next time, may God bless you.